The collar was already burning my neck before I fully opened my eyes. That was my first clear thought. Not where am I? Not how did I get here? Not even the pain in my left shoulder where something hard had clearly hit me during transport. The collar. It was tight against my throat, made of some kind of dense gray material I did not recognize, and it hummed at a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. I had worked enough security contracts in enough rough corners of the outer stations to know what a restraint device felt like. This one was military grade, maybe better than military grade. I did not move. I kept my breathing steady and slow, and I let my eyes do the work. The cell was about 4 meters wide and 5 meters long. The walls were dark metal, with a faint greenish tint to them, and the floor was slightly concave, like the inside of a bowl. Low gravity. Not zero, but low. My body felt about 60% of what it should, which meant we were either in a slow spin section of a ship, or somewhere with a smaller gravitational pull than Earth standard. One wall had a narrow seam of light running along the bottom, which was probably the door. The ceiling was featureless except for 2 circular panels that gave off a dull, cold glow. There was no bed. There was no water. There was a shallow groove cut into the far wall that I figured served as a drain of some kind. And there was something in the corner that was breathing. I turned my head very slowly. She was pressed into the far corner of the cell, with her back against the wall and her 4 arms drawn close to her body. I had seen pictures of the Thane before, in briefing files from a contract I once took near the Kandros shipping corridor. They were tall, bipedal, with elongated limbs and skin that shifted color the way calm water shifts in sunlight. Bioluminescent, the briefings had said. The light came from beneath the skin rather than sitting on top of it, and it moved in slow pulses, like a slow heartbeat made visible. Hers was barely lit, just the faintest blue along her collarbone and the underside of her forearms. Distress coloring, I guessed. Her eyes were large and set wide on a face that was angular and almost severe, with a narrow jaw and high, swept-back features. She was wearing what had probably been a very expensive garment before someone had torn the upper section of it during what I imagined had been a rough capture. She was watching me the way a person watches a dog that might or might not bite. I raised one hand slowly, palm out. It was the most universally legible gesture I knew. She did not move. "I am not going to hurt you," I said, keeping my voice quiet and level. She blinked. Once, very slow. I sat up carefully, giving my body time to adjust to the low gravity, so I would not embarrass myself by drifting awkwardly. My boots were still on. That was good. They had taken my jacket and my belt kit, but the boots had a false layer in the left heel where I kept a short length of carbon wire, and they had not found it. Small blessings. I checked myself methodically. Collar, which I was not going to touch yet, because restraint devices of that type often had contact sensors. No other restraints on my wrists or ankles, which told me whoever had put us here was confident the collar alone was enough. Slight bruising along my ribs. The shoulder pain was muscular, not structural. My head was clear, which meant whatever they had used to knock me out had worn off cleanly. I looked at the seam of light along the door, listened. There were footsteps outside, slow and rhythmic, passing every 40 seconds or so. One guard, I estimated, maybe 2, on a longer rotation that I had not yet caught the far end of. The sound of the footsteps was slightly heavier on one side than the other, which meant the floor outside was not level, or the guard was favoring a leg. I filed all of it away. The Than woman made a sound. It was quiet and structured, like a short phrase of music spoken rather than sung. I did not understand the words, but the tone was clear enough. She was asking me something. "I do not speak Thane," I said. "Do you know trade pidgin?" A pause. Then, carefully, in an accent that made each syllable sound like it had been placed with great deliberation. "Some, a little." "Good enough," I said. "My name is Marcus. What is yours?" Another pause, longer this time. I got the sense that giving her name to someone in a cell was not a small thing for her. "Vale Sira," she said finally. I nodded slowly. The apostrophe in the middle told me she was from one of the formal lineages. The briefings had mentioned that. High family names had a break in them, a catch in the throat when spoken. Low family names were smooth all the way through. "Do you know where we are?" I asked. "Ship," she said. "Moving. Deep space, I think. I cannot feel the star pull. That matched my gravity estimate. We were well away from any significant mass, which meant we were in transit, and transit meant a destination. Do you know where they are taking us? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. The blue light beneath her skin shifted, fading slightly at the edges of her face before coming back. Something was moving through her expression that I could not fully read yet. There is a place, she said carefully, called the Pale Market. I have heard it spoken of in court. It is where things are sold that should not be sold. I kept my face neutral. The Pale Market. I had heard that name too, though from different sources. A deep space auction station, supposedly decommissioned, operating under rotating coordinates, so it was never in the same place twice. The kind of place you only reached by being brought there. We were merchandise. I took a slow breath in through my nose and out through my mouth. I looked at the collar. I looked at the door seam. I counted the seconds between footsteps. I looked at the ceiling panels and thought about the wiring that would have to run behind them to power the lights. I thought about the carbon wire in my boot heel and what it could and could not do. And then I thought about the Pale Market and how much time we might have before we arrived and what condition they would want their merchandise in when they got there. Alive and unharmed, I decided. You did not damage goods you were trying to sell. That was useful. Valsira shifted slightly in her corner. The blue light along her collarbone pulsed once, brighter, then settled back to its dim glow. She was watching me with an expression I still could not fully read, but it had changed from the careful wariness of before into something more like scrutiny. You are thinking, she said. It was not a question. Always, I said. You are not afraid. I considered that for a moment. I am afraid, I said honestly. I am just also counting. She tilted her head to one side. One of her 4 hands uncurled slightly from its closed position. Counting what? Footsteps, I said. Light panels. Door thickness from the sound it makes when the guard brushes it. The way the floor feels when the ship adjusts course. I paused. Everything I can measure. She was quiet again, but the quality of her silence had changed. It was not the silence of someone too frightened to speak. It was the silence of someone thinking very hard. They took me from my transport vessel, she said after a while. 11 days ago, I believe. I lost time. She paused. I am the 3rd heir of the Thayan ascendancy. My presence at the signing of the Varn Compact was required. Without me, the signing cannot proceed. I looked at her. So someone wanted the signing stopped. Or delayed. Or wanted leverage over it. Her large eyes were steady and calm now in a way that was probably hard-won. I have thought about who would benefit. The list is not short. No, I agreed. I imagine it is not. We stayed quiet for a moment. The footsteps passed outside. 42 seconds this time. I adjusted my count. Then Valsira did something I did not expect. She reached across the gap between us, her nearest arm extending across the cell floor, palm upward. It was a gesture that clearly cost her something. I could see it in the way her shoulder set, in the slight change in her bioluminescence, a flicker of warmer color beneath the cool blue. Save me, she said quietly, and I will be yours. I looked at her hand, then at her face, then at the ceiling. I thought about the wire in my boot. I thought about 42 seconds between footsteps. I thought about a market where things were sold that should not be sold, and how far away it might be, and how much time I had to make something useful out of nothing. Then I started counting footsteps again. The ship hummed around us. Somewhere behind the walls, the engines pushed us deeper into the dark. I did not touch her hand, but I also did not look away. Tell me everything you know about this ship, I said. Start from the beginning. She pulled her hand back slowly. Something in her expression settled, like a person who has just realized they are talking to someone who speaks a language they understand, even if the words are different. She started talking. And I started planning. 3 days passed before I had anything worth calling a plan. In those 3 days, I learned several things. The guards rotated on a schedule of roughly 4 hours, with 2 individuals alternating shifts. One of them had a heavier tread and a habit of stopping near our door for about 6 seconds longer than necessary, probably checking a panel. The other was faster and quieter, almost bored in their movements. The ship made a slight shudder every time it corrected course, which happened on average twice per day. Our meals, such as they were, arrived through a slot at the base of the door, which was wide enough to pass a tray, but not wide enough for a hand. I also learned quite a lot about Valsira. She was 24 years old by human count, though the Thyene measured age differently, and she found the translation slightly amusing. She had spent the first 16 years of her life in formal diplomatic training, which meant she spoke 6 languages fluently and could read body posture in 12 species. She had never been in a fight, had never been seriously hungry, and had never slept on a bare floor before the last 11 days. She was handling all 3 of those things with a composure that I found genuinely impressive, even if I did not say so. She was also, I was beginning to understand, significantly smarter than she initially appeared in a frightened corner. "The collar you are wearing is a Grell standard restraint unit," she said on the second day. She was sitting cross-legged now, her forearms folded in a pattern that she had explained was a neutral resting posture in Thazen body language, readable to other species as simply relaxed. "The Grell manufacture them for prison transport. They have 2 failure modes. One is physical damage to the central ring, the other is power loss." I looked at her. "How do you know about Grell restraint units?" "I told you. 6 years of diplomatic training." She tilted her head. "The Grell were part of our curriculum because they produce the majority of security hardware used in the outer reaches. Their products are widely used in facilities where political prisoners are sometimes held." A pause. "My instructors were thorough." "Your instructors thought you might end up in a cell." "My instructors thought I might one day negotiate with people who kept others in cells," she said, with a precision that made the distinction feel important. "It is not the same thing." "Close enough right now," I said. She acknowledged that with a slight tilt of her head. The power loss angle was the one I kept coming back to. The restraint collar drew its power from a small internal cell, which was good for about 30 days of continuous operation. But it also had a secondary connection, a tether to the ship's local power grid, for use during extended transport. If the local grid lost power, the collar would switch to internal backup automatically. But there was a gap, a brief window during the switchover. Brief as in approximately 2 seconds. 2 seconds was not enough time to get the collar off. But it might be enough time to learn something about how the locking mechanism responded to a power interruption. I pulled the carbon wire from my boot heel on the second night and spent the next 6 hours doing very careful things with it, against the wall seam, where I judged the cell's local power conduit was most likely to run. Valsira watched me work. She did not ask questions. She occasionally told me when the footsteps outside were getting closer, her hearing apparently sharper than mine. On the 3rd morning, I had what I needed. Not freedom, not yet. But a sequence, a set of steps that could, if the timing was right and the luck held, and nothing went badly wrong in ways I had not predicted, get us out of the cell and into the rest of the ship. What we did from there depended on what we found. "I need to tell you something," I said, putting the wire away. Valsira looked at me steadily. "When I do what I am planning to do, things are going to move fast," I said. "There is no version of this where we have time to be careful or polite. We are going to have to move quickly and do things that may not be comfortable." "I am already sleeping on a metal floor," she said. "It is going to get worse before it gets better," I said. "I need to know if you can keep moving forward, even when everything tells you to stop." She was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescence along her forearms shifted slowly through 3 colors I had not seen her show before, a sequence that lasted about 5 seconds. Then it settled back to the cool blue. "I am the 3rd heir of the Thyene ascendancy," she said. "I have been held in this cell for 14 days. I have eaten food that tasted like cold machine oil. I have been frightened in ways I did not know I was capable of being frightened." She held my gaze. "I can keep moving." I nodded. "Good," I said. "Then here is what we are going to do." I told her the plan in full. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 3 very specific questions, all of which identified genuine weaknesses in my thinking, and I revised 2 steps on the spot based on her input. The diplomatic training was not just languages, I noted. She had been taught to find the gaps in arguments. She was doing it to my escape plan the same way she would do it to a treaty negotiation. I filed that away too. On the 4th day, I heard the ship change pitch. The engine note dropped slightly, And the course corrections stopped. We were slowing. Vale Sira felt it too. Her eyes met mine across the cell. "We are arriving," she said quietly. "Then we do it tonight," I said. She nodded once, no hesitation. The blue light under her skin had shifted to something steadier, something that looked, if I was reading it right, more like resolve than fear. I reached under my boot heel and took out the carbon wire. I want to explain something about how humans approach an impossible situation, because I think most species have never fully understood it. It is not that we do not feel fear. We do. I felt it that night, sitting on the floor of that cell with a piece of carbon wire and a plan held together by guesswork and stubbornness. My heart was running faster than I would have liked. My hands were steady, but only because I had trained them to be, not because I was calm underneath. The thing about humans is not that we are fearless. It is that fear does not make the decision for us. Other species, from what I had seen in my years working the outer contracts, tended to treat fear as information. If something frightened them, that was data. It meant the risk was real and should be weighted accordingly. They processed it, evaluated it, let it change the calculation. Humans do that too. But there is a second thing that happens. A stubborn, slightly irrational thing where the fear gets filed in a drawer and the hands keep moving anyway. Not because we have decided the fear is wrong, but because we have decided that stopping is worse. I do not know if that is a survival trait or a flaw. Probably both. What I know is that it was about to become very useful. The timing I needed was this. The ship's power grid would briefly redistribute during docking approach, as the engines handed control to maneuvering thrusters. I had felt that shift the last 2 times we had done minor course corrections, and I believed I could predict it within about a 10-second window. During that redistribution, there would be a moment where the local cell grid, our section of the ship, would run about 4% below standard power. 4% was not enough to trigger the collar's backup switch. But the wire I had been working with for 2 days had a shape now, a very specific shape that I had pressed against the collar's lower ring while it was at full power, learning the tolerance of its locking mechanism. At 4% below power, that tolerance changed, not by much, but by enough. If I applied the wire correctly, in the right spot, at exactly the right moment, the collar would not open. But it would give me information about how to open it later, one step at a time. I was on my knees in the center of the cell when I felt the engine note shift. Vale Sira was standing near the door, one hand pressed lightly against the wall. She was our early warning system. Her hearing and her sensitivity to vibration in the floor were both better than mine. "Now," she said softly. I put the wire against the collar. For a moment, nothing. The ship shuddered once, long and slow, as the thrusters took over. The lights in the cell flickered slightly, just a brief, almost invisible dimming. And the collar's locking ring shifted, not open, but a change in pressure, a release of about 0.5 millimeter that snapped back almost instantly. I had what I needed. I sat back on my heels and let out a breath. "Did it work?" Vale Sira asked. "Part of it," I said. "I know what the lock wants now. I need one more thing." "What thing?" I looked at the ceiling, at the power panels above us, at the seam where the wall met the floor. "I need to get to the ship's power conduit directly," I said. "Not through the wall, actually to it." She looked at the ceiling, then at me. "You want to go into the ceiling?" "Not yet," I said. "First, we have to get to the Pale Market. And I have to see what is there." She was quiet. Outside, the ship had stopped its maneuvering adjustments. We were docking. Through the wall, very faint, I could hear the first sounds of an external environment, movement, voices, the distant mechanical sound of docking clamps engaging. "Marcus," she said. I looked at her. "When we get out," she said, "and I believe that we will, I want you to know that the words I said to you on the first night were true. What they mean in Thene culture is not what you may think they mean. It is not a trade, it is not a debt of property." She paused, choosing her words with the precision of someone who had been trained to say exactly what they meant. "It is the highest promise one person can make to another. It means, I will not face what comes next without you beside me." I looked at her for a moment. "That is a different thing than what I thought," I said. Yes, she said. Okay, I said. The docking clamp settled with a deep, resonant thud that I felt through the floor and up through my knees. We had arrived. I put the wire back in my boot and started thinking about what came next. The Pale Market was not what I had imagined, and I had imagined something bad. It was worse. They moved us through a boarding corridor that smelled of recycled air and machine lubricant, hands bound in front with flexible tethers, collars active, 2 guards behind us with long-handled devices I recognized as neural prods. The corridor opened into a processing bay that was easily the size of a stadium, and it was full. Not full of people, full of captives. Every species I had ever seen in a briefing file, and several I had not. They were sorted into groupings by what I guessed was purchase category, standing or sitting in designated areas marked by painted lines on the floor. The lighting was efficient and cold. There were no windows. I counted entrances from the moment we entered, 3 that I could see. 1 large, 2 smaller. The large one was the way we had come in. The smaller ones were almost certainly for staff movement. Valsira moved beside me. Her bioluminescence was almost entirely suppressed, which I understood now was deliberate. She was making herself as visually unremarkable as she could. Smart. Thanin royal markings, whatever they were, would be worth a great deal in a place like this, and drawing attention was the last thing we needed. They separated us at the processing desk. I did not react visibly. I had known they might. I had told Valsira to expect it, but the moment they directed her to the left and me to the right, something hard and practical settled into my chest, the part of me that had worked security contracts in bad places, and learned that anger was a resource that had to be spent carefully. I looked back at her once. She met my eyes. Her expression was completely composed. She gave a single, tiny nod. I turned and walked where they pointed. They put me in a holding bay on the far side of the processing area, a large open room with about 40 other captives in it. The mix was extraordinary. I saw 3 Gren, heavy-bodied and gray-skinned, sitting together near the far wall. 2 Yal, slight and silver-limbed, huddled with their backs to each other. A Kandros with a broken shoulder harness, holding the cracked part carefully, as if it still mattered. A dozen species I could not immediately name. And 3 humans. I spotted them by posture before I saw their faces clearly. There is something about the way humans stand in a bad situation that is different from how other species stand. We take up our full space. Not aggressively, not as a performance, but because we were built for a planet that would kill you if you folded up too small. And that instinct does not fully leave, even in a room where it makes no practical difference. One was a woman in her 30s, with close-cut dark hair, and the kind of hands that came from field work. One was a man around my age, lean and quiet-faced, with a stillness to him that suggested either military background or very good self-control. The third was older, a woman somewhere in her 50s, sitting on the floor with her legs crossed and her eyes moving through the room in a pattern I recognized as systematic observation. I crossed to them at a pace that was not hurried enough to draw attention. The older woman looked up first. "You are new," she said. Her accent was clipped and Northern English. Her eyes were gray and very alert. "Just came in," I said. I crouched down to her level and kept my voice low. "How long have you been here?" 5 days, she said. "My name is Eleanor. I was a geological surveyor on the Drymar Belt. That one is Owen." She indicated the lean man with a slight movement of her head. "He says he was a cargo pilot. And that is Nina. She was working a medical rotation on a station near the Yarm boundary." Owen looked at me with the careful attention of someone who was used to making quick judgments about people. "And you?" "Marcus," I said. "Security contractor. Came in with a Thane captive, 3rd Royal Line. They separated us at processing." There was a brief silence. "3rd Royal Line," Eleanor said slowly. "That is not a random kidnapping." "No," I said, "it is not." Nina, the medic, looked up from the floor where she had been studying her own hands. She had dark eyes and a very steady expression. "What do you want?" she asked. It was a direct question, and she asked it without any particular heat, just practical curiosity. "Same thing you want," I said. "To leave." Owen leaned back against the wall. "Everyone here wants that. Wanting does not get the door open." "No," I agreed. "But I have been thinking about what might." I did not tell them everything, not yet. What I told them was enough to see how they responded, that I had spent several days studying the ship that brought me here, that I had a few specific pieces of technical knowledge that might be applicable, and that I was looking for people who were interested in a coordinated attempt rather than an individual one. What I was actually doing was reading them. The older woman asked where I got the technical knowledge and whether it was reliable. The medic asked what the failure scenarios looked like and what the medical risk would be. The pilot asked about the physical layout of the facility and what I knew about the docking section. Good questions, specific questions, questions that came from people who were frightened but not beaten. I answered what I could and told them honestly when I did not know. Near the wall, one of the Gren dock workers had been watching us for the last several minutes. I caught his eye. He had a large, flat face and small, deep-set eyes that were currently doing the same thing mine were doing, looking, measuring. I nodded at him slowly. He did not nod back, but he did not look away either. There is also that one to consider, I said quietly to the others. He has been watching the guards since day one, Eleanor said. He knows the shift schedule better than we do. I looked at her. You have been watching him watch them. I told you, she said pleasantly. I am a surveyor. Observation is the job. I thought about Vale Sira on the other side of this facility, in whatever holding area they had put her in, with her bioluminescence suppressed, and her diplomat's mind working through the same calculations mine was working through. I thought about 48 hours. 2 days of auction preparation before the first sales began, if what I had overheard in the processing corridor was accurate. 2 days was not very long, but it was something. All right, I said. I looked at Owen, at Nina, at Eleanor. Here is what I know about the power systems in a facility like this, and here is what I think we can do with a bad plan and people willing to make a lot of noise at exactly the right moment. Owen straightened slightly. Nina set her hands flat on her knees. Eleanor tilted her head with the expression of a person who has just been handed a problem she intends to solve. Somewhere across the facility, behind walls and locked doors, a Thane princess with the sharpest mind I had met in years was planning something of her own. I intended to make sure she had a door to walk through when she was ready. I started talking. The plan nearly fell apart before it started, the way most plans do. Not because of anything I had missed, exactly. More because reality has a habit of adding complications that no amount of careful thinking can fully predict. The first complication arrived on the morning of the second day, in the form of a priority transfer notice for Vale Sira. I found out through the Gren dock worker, whose name was Darrow, and who had, over the previous 24 hours, developed a cautious but functional working relationship with our group. Darrow had contacts among the other captives in the facility, particularly among 2 Y'all who were held in an adjacent section and who had managed to maintain a line of communication through a gap in the wall paneling. Through that chain, Vale Sira was being moved in 12 hours, not 48. Someone had recognized her, not as royalty, as something more specific, as the key to a political arrangement that someone was willing to pay a very large sum to control. The buyer was already en route. 12 hours. I sat with that information for about 90 seconds. Then I changed the plan. The original approach had been built around the auction cycle, using the increased movement of staff and captives during sales preparation to create cover for a localized power disruption in the docking section. Elegant, if slow. 12 hours took elegant off the table. What we had instead was noise. Eleanor had identified, over her 5 days of observation, that the facility's ventilation maintenance access ran along the ceiling of the central processing bay. She had also noted that the maintenance access panels were secured with a type of mechanical latch she recognized from a geological survey station she had worked on in the outer Drymar. Same manufacturer, same era of construction. Cheap, reliable, and openable from the inside, if you had the right angle of pressure. Nina had something better than a plan. She had a problem the guards were going to have to respond to. The Kandros captive with the broken shoulder harness had, it turned out, a severe reaction to the food compound the facility used as a standard prisoner ration. Not dangerous, but dramatic. The kind of reaction that produced symptoms that looked significantly worse than they were, and that no competent facility manager would ignore, because a dead captive was a lost sale. The Kandros understood what we were asking. He had been in the Pale Market for 9 days. He had stopped asking to be saved and started asking to be useful. He agreed. The sequence was this. Nina would identify the moment of maximum response, the point where the symptoms were most alarming without being genuinely dangerous. Darrow would use that moment to approach the guards nearest the staff corridor and demand attention, loudly, as a frightened captive understandably would. Owen would be at the ventilation access panel. Eleanor and I would be at the door to the adjacent section. The EMP was the part that worried me most. I want to be clear that calling it an EMP is generous. What it actually was, the central conducting rings from 3 restraint collars, 2 of which had been quietly removed from captives, who had been in the facility long enough that the internal power cells were running low, combined with the charge accumulator from a medical monitoring device that Nina had been issued when she arrived, because of a pre-existing cardiac monitoring note in her file. The assembly was about the size of my fist and would produce, if I had done the calculations correctly, a localized power disruption in a roughly 6-meter radius. Roughly. I had built worse things in worse conditions, but not many. The goal was not to black out the whole facility. That would trigger emergency lockdown, and we would go nowhere. The goal was to knock out power to a specific junction in the staff corridor, adjacent to the holding section where Vale Sira had been placed. No power to that junction meant the holding doors in that section ran on mechanical backup. Mechanical backup meant they could be opened from outside with the right application of pressure to the emergency release. I had felt a Grell standard emergency release once before, on a contract in the Candros shipping corridor, where I had to get into a secure bay in a hurry. The principle was not complicated. The execution required a very specific angle, and about 40 pounds of force applied to exactly the right point. 40 pounds. In the low gravity of this facility, that was going to feel like about 24. I practiced the motion with my hands while I waited. The moment came at the shift change, when the 2 guards in the staff corridor were at their furthest point of separation. The Candros was already showing his symptoms, sitting against the far wall with his head down and his breathing loud and uneven. Nina was beside him, doing exactly what a person with medical training would do, speaking calmly, taking his pulse, looking alarmed in a controlled way. The guards noticed. Darrow moved. I moved the same moment Darrow did, which was the only reason it worked, because the second guard turned toward the noise and did not turn toward me. Owen reached the ventilation panel. I heard it open. That was my signal. I pressed the device against the junction housing in the staff corridor wall. The lights went out in that section. Not all the lights. Not even most. A 6-meter radius, give or take. In the dark, I found the emergency release by feel, memory of practice, the angle, the point, the force. The door opened. The holding section on the other side was dim but not dark. Emergency lighting, low and red. I moved through it fast, reading the numbering on the holding units as I passed. Vale Sira had been given a unit number through the Yawl communication chain. I counted down. I reached the door. Vale Sira, I said, quietly but clearly. A pause of about 1 second. Marcus, she said from the other side. Stand back from the door, I said. She did. I applied the same technique. The angle was slightly different here. The emergency release on this model was a generation older than the one in the corridor, and I had to adjust. My shoulder screamed at me. I ignored it. The door opened. She was standing in the center of the unit, composed, her forearms folded in the resting position that I now knew was not actually calm, but was her deliberately performed version of calm. Her bioluminescence was still suppressed. Her eyes, in the red emergency lighting, were very steady. You came, she said. Told you I was planning, I said. Can you run in this gravity? Yes, she said. Good, I said. We have about 90 seconds before they trace the power disruption. Move. She moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not elegant. It was fast, loud, and involved more improvisation than I was comfortable with. Owen had the ventilation access open. Eleanor went through first because she knew the route. Nina was right behind her. The Candros supported between her and Darrow. Vale Sira and I were last. At the docking bay entrance, there was a problem I had anticipated, and one I had not. The anticipated problem was the Enforcer ship at the main dock, a mid-range patrol vessel that was currently blocking our only viable exit corridor. The one I had not anticipated was that Owen had already solved it, in a way that I would not have thought of, and that was either brilliant or insane. He had found the facility's docking management terminal in the ventilation access route, a maintenance terminal that Eleanor had noted days ago, and had used it to send a priority dock request to the Enforcer ship's automated navigation system. A priority request from a facility management terminal looked, to the ship's system, like a legitimate docking emergency that required the vessel to reposition to the secondary bay. It was repositioning as we arrived. Owen looked at me. "Cargo pilot," he said simply. "Right," I said. We took the ship that was left. I will not pretend it was clean. It was not. The departure involved a lot of shouting in several languages, at least 2 alarms, and a moment where I genuinely did not know if the docking clamps were going to release in time. They released. Eleanor handled navigation. Owen handled the engines. Nina handled Darrow, who had taken a hit from a neural prod in the last 30 seconds of our run and was having trouble with his left side. I sat in the cargo bay with my back against the wall and Valsera beside me. We were moving. Away from the Pale Market. Away from the station that should not exist. My shoulder felt like someone had poured fire into the joint. My hands were finally shaking, now that they did not need to be steady. The collar was still around my neck, but whatever frequency it had been broadcasting back to the station had a range limit, and we were past it. For the first moment in weeks, I was not in a cell. I put my head back against the cargo bay wall. Valsera sat with her forearms folded. Her bioluminescence had returned, not the suppressed dim blue of captivity, but something warmer, deeper, a color I had not seen from her before, moving slowly along her forearms in long, steady pulses. "What does that color mean?" I asked. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She looked down at her own arms, as if checking. "It is the color we show when something we believed was lost has been found," she said. I did not have a response to that. She looked at me. "Your hands are shaking," she said. "I know," I said. "Are you all right?" "I will be," I said. "Give me a minute." She gave me the minute without comment, which was exactly what I needed. The ship moved steadily away from the coordinates of the Pale Market. Eleanor was talking to Owen in the cockpit. Nina was working on Darrow. The Kandros was sleeping. After a while, Valsera spoke again. "There is something I want to say to you," she said. "All right," I said. "In my culture, what I said to you in the cell, the words 'I will be yours,' they are not offered lightly. They are not offered between strangers. They are the words of the sworn bond, which is given only in extraordinary circumstances, between people who have faced something that neither could have survived alone." She paused. "I said them to you before I knew if you would accept them, before I knew if you were trustworthy. I said them because I was frightened, and because you were the only one in that cell who was thinking clearly." "I heard you," I said. "I am saying them again now," she said, "and they mean something different than they did then. Not a bargain, not a request. They are a recognition." She held my gaze. "I could not have survived that without you, and I do not think you would have had reason to keep going without me." I thought about that. She was not wrong. The plan had been built around getting her out. Having a clear objective had made the difference between having a direction and just having desperation. Desperation alone was not much use. "The bond works both ways," she said. "That is what people sometimes misunderstand about it. It is not one person belonging to another. It is 2 people choosing to face the same direction." Outside the hull of the ship, the dark was enormous and full of stars. Somewhere in it was a transit hub where we would wait for the Than diplomatic ships to reach us. 3 weeks, the communication had said, maybe less. "The nomination process for the Varn Compact," I said. "You need to be there." "Yes," she said. "And the people who arranged your removal," I said. "You know who they are now." "I have a very strong idea," she said, with a quietness in her voice that was not gentle at all. It was the quietness of someone who had been frightened for a long time and had come out of it with very clear priorities. "You are going back to your court," I said. "Yes," she said. A pause. "I could help with that," I said carefully. "Not as part of a bond, not as a debt or a payment, just as a person who is currently between contracts and who has some experience with situations where people with too much power make other people's lives difficult. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come with me." Not as mine, as my equal. I looked at the ceiling of the cargo bay for about 3 seconds. The ship hummed. My hands had stopped shaking. I picked up my bag from the floor beside me, the bag that Owen had somehow grabbed on the way through the docking bay. Bless the man. "All right," I said. Vale Sira's bioluminescence shifted again, the warm, deep color moving along her arms in long, unhurried pulses. Outside, the stars were still there. We flew toward them,